In the mid-1800s, a merchant named Andrew J. Myrick, born on May 28, 1832, established his commercial presence in southwestern Minnesota. He conducted his trading operations alongside his Dakota spouse, Gawin, who also went by Nancy Myrick, overseeing retail establishments at two Native American outposts situated near the Minnesota River. Their primary clientele consisted of Dakota people who were generally known as the Sioux during that era. Deep-rooted grievances ultimately erupted into the Dakota War of 1862, alternatively referenced as the Sioux Uprising. The Dakota community harbored mounting resentment over treaties that had divested them of their traditional lands, coupled with the widespread corruption in the promised government payment system. The advent of the Civil War created additional delays in these payments, heightening existing tensions. The Minnesota frontier grew increasingly volatile as many white settlers and military personnel departed to participate in the broader conflict. Historical discussions frequently centered on Myrick's influence in these events preceding the uprising. His notoriety stemmed from a purported response to the Dakotas' urgent request for sustenance, wherein he allegedly declared, "If they are hungry, let them eat grass." This perceived heartless statement supposedly incensed Dakota leadership, particularly Little Crow. Historians highlighted this alleged comment as a crucial catalyst, noting its role in amplifying Little Crow's existing discontent. The situation deteriorated rapidly when, 2 days after Myrick's supposed statement, Dakota hunters took the lives of 5 white settlers near Acton, Minnesota. Following an intense overnight council, Little Crow opted for military action. The initial assault occurred on August 18, 1862, targeting the lower agency in what would later become Redwood Falls, inaugurating a bloody conflict that resulted in numerous casualties among both populations. While historians traditionally presented Myrick's words as the conflict's catalyst, subsequent analysis revealed potential discrepancies in this interpretation. Questions arose regarding the precise timing and location of the alleged remark, with limited concrete evidence placing the exchange at the lower agency immediately before hostilities began. Beyond his connection to these events, Myrick remained relatively unknown. Together with his brother Nathan, he managed trading establishments at both agency locations, extending credit to the Dakota and recouping payments from government-distributed annuities. Trading figures like the Myricks had become essential components of Dakota commerce by the 1850s, facilitating exchanges of manufactured items for furs and other goods. However, by 1862, the Dakota community had developed significant distrust and anger towards these traders, believing they demanded disproportionate annuity compensation for minimal merchandise. The situation deteriorated in early 1862, when Civil War complications hindered federal financial obligations to the Dakota people. Payment delays from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, combined with food scarcity, created desperate conditions. At the upper agency near Yellow Medicine, Dakota Military Society members resolved to block trader payments. Tensions peaked on August 4th when Dakota warriors ransacked a government storehouse. Lieutenant Timothy J. Sheehan, leading 5th Minnesota Volunteer Regiment forces, strengthened security in response. Officials eventually resolved the immediate crisis through negotiations, convincing the Dakota to pursue buffalo hunting instead. Indian agent Thomas J. Galbraith's documented encounter with Little Crow at the lower agency on August 15th provided additional historical context. Galbraith's records described an amicable discussion, noting no indications of the impending conflict. His observations about maturing Dakota crops suggested less severe food shortages than later accounts implied. When historians looked at the records from that time, they found no mention of a council meeting around August 15th. The story of Myrick's insult first appeared in 1919, when Winifred Barton wrote about her father, missionary John P. Williamson. She wrote that hundreds of Indians gathered with traders and officials just before the war started. According to her story, when discussions about food got heated, Myrick told the Dakota people to eat grass. The interpreter refused to translate these harsh words, so Agent Galbraith asked Williamson to do it instead. After hearing the translation, the Dakota responded with war cries. While Barton didn't give an exact date, her story caught the attention of historian William Watts Falwell. Falwell wasn't sure about Barton's version of the events. He had seen Galbraith's own report, which only mentioned a brief meeting with Little Crow, not a big council. He wrote to Barton asking for more details. She told him her father had told the story many times in his old age, though she admitted his memory might have changed over time. When Falwell kept asking questions, Barton got frustrated and told him to leave the story out if he didn't believe it. Falwell then asked other people who had been there. Thomas A. Robertson, an interpreter who was around in August 1862, said he knew nothing about it and thought it was strange that Galbraith hadn't mentioned it. The Allenson family, who had lived through the war, couldn't add any information either. Dr. Asa W. Daniels, who worked at the agency, flatly said Barton was wrong about the council. William's sons backed up their sister's story, saying their mother had also heard it from their father. After weighing all these different accounts, Falwell decided to include the story in his work, but with some doubts. By late 1922, he thought that while a smaller meeting might have happened at the lower agency around August 14th or 15th, it probably wasn't as big as Barton described. Even though some details were probably wrong, he still stressed how deeply Myrick's insult had hurt the Dakota tribe. Revenge was just around the corner. Two white men who were there wrote different stories about what happened at the upper agency in early August. Lieutenant Sheehan kept a daily journal, while Galbraith wrote an official report later. Both agreed on one thing. The Dakota at Yellow Medicine were starving. They couldn't find enough food from hunting, and Galbraith had only enough supplies for the white workers. The traders had stopped giving the Dakota credit because they weren't sure they'd get paid back from the government money that was coming. Unlike the Dakota at the lower agency, most of these people didn't grow their own food. When Sheehan arrived on July 2nd, some Dakota warriors came to him asking for food. They also told him they planned to stop traders from taking their government money when it arrived. Sheehan told them to talk to Galbraith, who gave out some crackers on July 25th. People saw Dakota men scrambling on the ground for these crackers, showing just how desperate they were. By August 4th, when no more food came, Dakota people from the Sisseton and Wahpeton bands broke into the agency warehouse and took flour and sugar. Sheehan said about 1,500 Dakota men were involved, though this number might have been too high. He stopped the raid by threatening to fire a cannon at the door. When the smoke had cleared, Galbraith had hid in his house, and Sheehan got the Dakota to agree to a meeting. They demanded food, saying the supplies in the warehouse belonged to them, and warned there would be trouble if they didn't get help. When Sheehan told Galbraith, he first wanted the food back, but then agreed to give out some supplies. The next day only got worse. After Galbraith told Sheehan to arrest the raiders, Galbraith tried to run away with his family, but the Dakota made him come back. The Dakota took down their tents and looked ready for war. Then, Galbraith told Sheehan to arrest Peter Quinn, the Army's translator, thinking Quinn had helped with the raid. Others said that this wasn't true. Seeing he'd lost control, Sheehan sent Quinn to Fort Ridgely for help. Galbraith then asked for help from missionary Stephen Return Riggs, who knew the Dakota well. Riggs talked with Dakota leaders and held several meetings to calm things down. Galbraith was there, and probably some traders too, but Sheehan stayed at the warehouse. On August 6th, Captain John Marsh came from Fort Ridgely with more soldiers. He told Galbraith to give blankets and supplies to the Dakota. Sheehan said Marsh even threatened to arrest traders if they were causing trouble with the natives. After more meetings on August 7th and August 8th, they opened the storehouses. Most Dakota then left to hunt buffalo. By August 11th, they had moved past Big Stone Lake, and people stopped worrying about war. Galbraith started recruiting for a Civil War unit called the Renville Rangers, and he left Yellow Medicine on August 13th and saw Little Crow at the lower agency 2 days later. Looking at these events, Myrick's famous insult probably happened between August 5th and August 8th. Little Crow arrived around August 5th or 6th with a few men. The story Barton told later might have been about this meeting, since Little Crow supposedly said hungry Dakota would help themselves, probably talking about the warehouse raid. It's harder to prove John Williamson was there. He usually worked at the lower agency, but he might have traveled the 30 miles north to help since things were getting bad. While it's not clear why other traders would let Myrick speak for them, most traders lived at the lower agency and left workers in charge at Yellow Medicine. So maybe these workers asked Myrick for advice. While we can't prove Myrick was at the upper agency, Galbraith's letters show he thought Myrick and his brother Nathan were causing problems. Galbraith complained about Myrick and Old Mix working against him. This might mean Myrick was making things worse. When Captain Marsh threatened to jail traders on August 6th, it might have been because of Galbraith's worries. Around this time, women and children were moved from the upper agency to the lower agency. Sarah Wakefield, who was married to the agency doctor, wrote about what happened at Yellow Medicine. She remembered the warehouse raid and how desperate the Dakota were. She wrote about meetings after the raid, where traders told the Dakota they wouldn't get more money and would have to, quote, eat grass like cattle, unquote. While she didn't say when this happened or named Myrick, it suggests the eat grass comment came in early August. Two Dakota people who later talked about the war hinted at other reasons for the fighting. Some Dakota were unhappy with the US government's attempts to change their way of life, white settlers taking their hunting lands, and how the government money system favored Dakota farmers over those who wanted to keep living traditionally. A group of Dakota warriors at the lower agency had talked about fighting back long before the war started. Also, Little Crow never got the supplies he was promised for helping solve problems at the upper agency in early August. For traditional Dakota near the lower agency who didn't farm, fighting against white control seemed like a way to fix their problems. The real reasons for the war were much more complicated than people usually say. Focusing too much on Myrick's insult has led to a too simple view of the war that ignores the bigger problems in Dakota society in 1862. To really understand what happened, historians need to look more carefully at things like the different groups within the Dakota people and how government programs affected their lives. While Myrick's eat grass comment might not have been the main spark that started the war, it perfectly captures the arrogant and deadly miscalculation that many white traders made when dealing with native people. Just days after mocking starving people who were simply asking for the food and supplies they were owed, Andrew Myrick became one of the first casualties of the uprising. The Dakota warriors who killed him made sure to stuff grass into his dead mouth, a grim but fitting reminder that cruel words spoken from a position of power can have very real consequences. Myrick learned this lesson too late, becoming a cautionary tale that echoes through history. If you mock desperate people who vastly outnumber you and have legitimate grievances, you might just find out exactly how badly you've misjudged the situation. In other words, in the Wild West, if you mess around, you find out.